The morning the world decided what to do with her, Lena Ward stood so still that a man could have mistaken her for one of the courthouse posts. Only her eyes moved, watching everything, trusting nothing. Somewhere down the street, a train whistle called once, long and low, and faded into the heat. The dust on Millstone's Main Street had not yet been stirred by wagon wheels. The early sun lay flat and gold across the courthouse steps, where the children stood in a line, the way the county had told them to, the way they had been told to stand more times than any child should have to learn. The county called it a placement fair. The word fair sat strangely in the warm air, because nothing about it felt like one. Not the silence, not the careful posture of the smaller children trying to look agreeable, not the way grown men and women walked the line slowly, the way a person walks past stalls of livestock looking for something useful rather than something to love. Lena was 14. She had learned the hard way that being chosen depended on being useful, and so she stood straight, taller than most of the boys beside her, her chin level, her hands folded, refusing to let her face ask for anything. Eli Mercer had not planned to be there at all. He was 39, a railroad laborer between jobs, riding a gray gelding named Tom that had carried him since the last year of the war. He had once had a family of his own. He did not speak of it, not to strangers, and rarely to himself. He might have ridden past, the way dozens of other men did that morning. But something about the tall girl at the end of the line made him slow Tom's steps without deciding to. She was not crying. She was not performing the careful hopefulness the younger children had been taught to wear. There was something in that refusal that struck him square in the chest, though he could not have said why, and he found himself dismounting before he had decided to do that either. The county clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and a voice as flat as the prairie itself, was working down the line with the unhurried efficiency of a man reading a weather report. When he reached Lena, he simply said her name, her age, and the word that meant the most. None. No parents, no relatives, no destination written down anywhere. Eli stood there longer than he meant to. Lena looked back at him the way she looked at everything, carefully, openly, as though measuring the size and direction of a storm that might or might not be heading her way. Finally, because the silence had gone on too long, Eli asked the only question that seemed to matter. "What happens to the ones no one picks?" he said. The clerk did not look up from his papers. "They stay until someone does," he said. "Or they don't." There was no cruelty in it. It was simply a fact, stated plainly by a tired man on a hot morning, and it settled into Eli's chest like a stone dropped into still water. He reached into his coat, into the small leather pouch that held nearly everything he had left in the world, and he placed $2 on the table. He did not explain it. For a long time afterward, he did not understand it himself. Lena did not thank him. She picked up the small canvas bag that held everything she owned, and she asked the only question that mattered to her. "Where am I going?" she said. "Iowa line," he answered, after a pause that felt longer than it was. "There's a work camp near the rail extension. It's not certain. Nothing is." She nodded once, slowly, as though filing the information away somewhere safe. "That's honest," she said. It was the first thing she ever liked about him, though neither of them knew it yet. They left Millstone before noon. Tom could not carry two and the gear besides, so Eli walked, leading the horse by its rope while Lena rode. When she offered, more than once, to walk instead, he only said that Tom had carried heavier loads than her and worse company. She did not offer again, though that evening Eli noticed she had quietly given the horse half of her own bread. The road north unspooled through fields gone gold and brittle with the last of the summer heat, the kind of country that seemed to stretch on simply to remind a person how small they were. Lena did not complain, Not once. She asked practical questions instead: where they would sleep, how far they had left to go, what kind of work waited at the end of the road, and Eli answered each one honestly, because he had learned, somewhere in the war and somewhere after it, that false comfort cost more than it was worth. On the third night, with the fire burned down to embers and the stars arranged overhead in their slow, indifferent wheel, Lena finally asked the question Eli had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting. "Why did you take me?" she said. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, careful, the voice of a man choosing each word as though it cost something. "Because I was standing there," he said, "and because nobody else did." He paused. "I had someone once," he added, "a long time ago. I didn't get to keep her."
Lena looked at the fire, not at him. After a moment, she nodded and asked nothing more, because she understood, the way people who have lost things understand each other without needing the whole story. The railroad camp outside Burlington was not a kind place, not cruel exactly, but rough, the way places built quickly by tired men tend to be. All canvas and mud and the constant ringing of iron against iron. The foreman, a heavyset man named Dawes, did not like the idea of a girl in his camp, and he said so plainly. Lena did not flinch. "I can cook," she said. "I can haul water. I don't get scared easily." Dawes looked at her the way a man looks at a tool he isn't sure will hold, then looked at Eli. "She yours?" he asked. Eli hesitated, and in that hesitation something passed between them that neither of them named. "No," he said. That should have been the end of it. Instead, Lena spoke again, calmly, the way she said most things. "I can work like I am," she said. Something in the quiet certainty of it settled the matter in a way arguments could not have. Dawes grunted and turned away, and that was as close to permission as the camp ever gave. She stayed. That first autumn, the evenings turned cold early, and the bunkhouse lamps burned a little longer each night. Lena had picked up reading from the few books and newspapers that passed through camp, sounding out the harder words slowly under her breath. One evening, Eli admitted, a little embarrassed, that his own letters were shaky, learned young and never much used. So they began trading evenings, her reading aloud to him helping her with the words that gave her trouble, and it became, without either of them naming it, the quietest and steadiest hour of each day. Weeks became months. Lena worked harder than men twice her age, her hands growing rough, her back growing strong. She began saving food for Eli without being asked, a little extra set aside on nights the cook ran short. He began checking the sky each morning before she woke, so he could tell her, without making it sound like worry, whether she would need her coat. Tom grew used to her voice and would turn his head toward her before she even reached the corral. Neither of them spoke of what any of it meant, because some things mean more if they are simply done, quietly, again and again, until they become as ordinary and necessary as breathing.
One evening in the town nearest the camp, a crewman named Hollis cornered Lena outside the mercantile and said something low and ugly, the kind of thing men say to a girl they believe has no one watching over her. Eli came around the corner just as Lena went very still, the way she did when she was deciding how much danger she was in. Eli did not shout. He stepped between them, looked at Hollis, and said only, "She's not alone. Say it again and find out what that means." That was all, but something in his voice made Hollis take a step back, and by morning, Hollis had collected his pay and was gone before the work whistle blew. No one spoke of it again, though Lena, walking back to camp that night, Lena said quietly, "You didn't have to do that." Eli said just as quietly, "Yes, I did," and that was the end of it, though Lena walked a little less braced against the world after that. Winter came early that year, the kind that empties a camp and sends men scattering toward whatever roofs they can find. Eli and Lena found themselves in a rented room above a feed store, 2 narrow beds and a stove that never quite drove out the cold. It was there, on a night when the wind pressed against the walls like something trying to get in, that Eli finally said the thing he had been carrying for longer than he could measure. "I had a wife once," he said, "and a daughter. I was away at the war when the fever came through. By the time I got home, there was only a grave to visit, and after a while I stopped visiting it because it was easier to keep moving than to keep showing up to an empty chair." Lena sat very still, the firelight moving across her face, listening the way she always listened, with her whole self. "I don't have a home," he went on, "not really. I can keep moving the way I always have, or I can try to stay somewhere, try to make something permanent. But I keep thinking about you. I don't want to be one more thing that didn't stay." "What would that look like," Lena asked, "if you stayed?" "Something legal, maybe," Eli said. "Something on paper, so if anything ever happened to me, you wouldn't just be alone again, with no name attached to you, the way you were on those courthouse steps. Something that means you belong somewhere, even if that somewhere is an old railroad man and a horse who likes you better than he likes me." Lena almost smiled at that, the first time he had seen her come close to it in a long while. Then she looked down at her hands, the same hands that had hauled water and held the reins across 200 miles of empty country. And when she looked up again, her voice was steady in a way that Eli's chest ached. "I'd stay," she said, "if it meant I wasn't temporary anymore." That was the closest either of them ever came to making a promise. The paperwork that followed took less time than either of them expected, because the men behind the desks there had little patience for definitions that didn't matter on the ground. Within a week, Eli Mercer was, in the only way the law there understood, Lena Ward's guardian. That night, for the first time since the war, Eli slept without dreaming of an empty chair. The years moved the way seasons moved. Work and weather and the long, quiet stretches between them. Lena grew the way certain land grows, slowly and then all at once. She learned soil and weather patterns and the schedules of the railroads that carried goods to market, and she kept reading long after the lamplight lessons had become unnecessary. One spring, a farmer 2 counties over, whose fields kept flooding in the wrong places, was told by 3 different men to go ask Lena. He found a young woman barely 20 who walked his fields for an afternoon and told him exactly where to dig, and his fields never flooded the same way again. Word traveled faster than either of them expected. Before long, no one in town called her the girl who came with Mercer. They simply said, "Ask Lena." Eli never corrected anyone who assumed she was his daughter, and he never claimed it either. But every evening, no matter how late the work ran, there was a place set for him near the stove. Not because anyone required it, because it had become, somewhere along the way, a habit too deep to be called anything but love. On the evening of Lena's 21st birthday, she found him outside the old rail shed they had long since stopped using for work and started using simply as a place to sit. Tom grazed nearby, gray-muzzled now and slow, but still turning his head toward her voice. Eli was watching the sun go down, the way he always did when his thoughts ran heavier than usual. "I need to ask you something," she said. He nodded. "Go ahead." "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Regret what?" he said, though he already suspected. "Stopping," she said, "that day in Millstone, spending what you had on a girl you didn't know." Eli was quiet for a long moment, watching the light fail slowly over the fields. When he finally spoke, his voice was certain in a way it had rarely been before that morning on the courthouse steps. "I used to think I was just passing through my own life," he said, "waiting to disappear and not minding much if I did. I had something once, and I lost it, and after that, I figured the rest of my days were just time I was killing until they ran out." He turned to look at her. "And then I was standing there," he said, "and there you were, and I haven't felt like I was passing through anything since, not one day of it." Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said simply, "Good." And there was so much in that one small word, relief and gratitude, and something that might have been love, spoken the only way either of them knew how to speak it, plainly, without decoration. She rose and went inside to start supper, the way she did every evening. Eli sat alone a while longer in the cooling light, with Tom's breathing slow and steady behind him, thinking about $2 spent on a roadside decision he had never fully understood. He had once believed the war and the fever had taken the only family he would ever have. He had been wrong. He had simply not found the rest of it yet. On a dusty morning, for the price of $2, standing still long enough for someone to stay. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that the smallest decisions made by ordinary people on ordinary days can change the whole shape of a life, then take a moment to subscribe to Desert Heart, because every week we bring you stories like this one, stories of quiet courage, loyalty, and the kind of love that doesn't announce itself, but simply stays. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story of an unlikely family, an unexpected kindness, or a promise kept long after anyone was watching. If you have a parent, a grandparent, or anyone who once chose to show up for someone with nothing, share this story with them tonight, because somewhere, someone is still grateful that a stranger once decided to stop walking. This story is best read aloud slowly, with gentle pauses between paragraphs, especially after lines of dialogue and at the close of each scene. Let the silences breathe. A soft, warm, unhurried voice, almost like someone telling a memory by firelight, will serve it best. Slow down further during the Hollis confrontation, the winter conversation, and the final sunset scene, allowing extra space after the closing line before moving into the subscribe message. The educational and human value of this story lies in what it quietly teaches about chosen family, dignity, and the long-term impact of small acts of decency. It shows that legal definitions like guardian do not determine the depth of a relationship, and that consistency, showing up day after day without asking for credit, is what actually builds trust and belonging. It also honors two often overlooked parts of American history, the orphaned and unplaced children of the frontier era, and the quiet toll the Civil War took on men who came home to find their families gone. For older audiences, it offers a gentle reminder that grief does not have to be the end of a story, and that it is never too late, and no one too ordinary, to change the direction of another person's life and their own, simply by choosing to stay.